Are you on the landlord cycle of failure? Let's talk about it today on the Landlord Coach Daily-ish Show.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, ignition, liftoff.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Landlord Coach Daily-ish Show. My name is Mark Dolfini, and the Landlord Coach and host of the Landlord Coach Daily-ish Show. It's good to see you. I hope you had an awesome weekend. I had a fantastic weekend. I spent it with my coaching students doing a mastermind, and man, it was exhausting, but exhausting in just such a good way. So if you guys are not involved in a mastermind group, I would totally encourage you to do that. So I have a mastermind group I'm a part of in addition to the one that I host, and it's just amazing the amount of learning that went on. So anyway, let's talk about today's show. Are you on the cycle of failure as a landlord? So first of all, let me define what the cycle of failure is. So this is where a rental property owner buys a house, rents it out. They don't really make any money at this, and they're having a horrible experience with the tenants. The tenants lie to them. They move out. They leave the place a mess, and they get to a point where they feel like they're working a job, and the phone never stops ringing. And when it does, it's just drama. And they get to a point where they're so emotionally compromised that they are ready to sell the property, whatever it takes, even if it means just breaking even or even taking a financial loss. They just need to get done with this property. Now, this property, again, I call this the landlord cycle of failure. Not to sound so harsh, but that process takes somewhere around 5 to 7 years, depending on your level of masochism, stamina, and self-loathing. So this kind of got me thinking, like, how long do America's landlords, on average, how long do they typically own their properties? So I was digging around for some data, and I found this put out by the Foremost Insurance Group, and this is several years old, but the data that I was finding were actually quite interesting because they were supporting data, no matter, pre-recession, post-recession, and in more modern times. But what I'm finding is that the average length of time that most landlords own their properties is that 34% of all landlords own their properties longer than 1 year, but not longer than 5 years. So you have 34%. The bulk of the landlords, the rental property owners, own their properties between 1 and 5 years. The bell curve starts to drop off after year 5. So from year 6 to 10, 31% of owners own their properties there. So you have 34% of all landlords own their properties from years 1 to year 5, and 31% of landlords own it between year 6 and 10. After that, it drops off like substantially. After that, I think the next tier is like 12%, and that's like up to 15 years. So I mean, it literally just bottoms out after that. Most people don't own them much after 20 years. So it's really interesting that the bulk of the ownership is owned between 1 and about 7 years, if I had to interpolate those data. So I thought that was actually quite telling, because I was sitting here thinking, well, here's an interesting thought about this, about how banks make their money and how often people get out of their houses. So I'll talk about that here in a second. So this is typically how a cycle of failure happens. So year 1, you're a landlord and you're super pumped up. Man, this is exciting. You know what? I don't mind. I'm the master of my own destiny. I'm going to go out and I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to spend my weekends, out painting and doing the real estate hustle. I found a property. I'm going to buy it right now. I'm going to fix it up and get it rented. And, it's exciting. I'll be honest with you. I remember those days. It was 22 years ago, but I remember those days. I was out there, I was painting, I was getting this thing cleaned up. So then by years 2 and 3, you're thinking about buying another couple rentals because it hasn't been too bad. You don't mind putting in your extra time, right? fix them up super nice, putting a bunch of money into them. By this time, the first residents left because generally, on average, 41% of rental property owners face an eviction, or not eviction, but face vacancy of some form. Whether it's a resident moving out or an actual economic vacancy where someone is in there and not paying. So you still got to get someone out and someone that's going to pay. So roughly about once every other year, you're going to be facing vacancy, right, of some sort. So by year 2 or 3, you're definitely going to be looking for another resident. Generally, on average, that's generally the case. So of course, you're trying to be a nice guy, and you don't really want to, hold them accountable to much, but you've got the deposit, and they left the place a little bit of a mess, and you're a little upset because you're like, how could they do this? And so any actual profit that you might have made over and above your mortgage ends up going back into the repairs of the property. This is after year 2 or 3. So you start thinking, gosh, I literally just worked for free for the last 2.5 years. But by year 4, it's you got in a couple extra rentals, and you're thinking, well, you know what, maybe this is about as good as it gets. But you can't start to think like, I'm expecting all this money coming in, where my original, my rents that are coming in, I should be making $300 or $400 a month, but and I make that $300 or $400 a month, and every couple of months that money all seems to go out the window because I have to do a repair, or I have to, or something, they don't pay. And now I'm scrambling to cover the mortgage on my own. Like, is this even worth it? And you're spending more weekends at your rentals than you can even remember. And, that you can even count, actually. But you know what? You're going to see this through. You're resolved to keep this thing going. So we're talking about the landlord cycle of failure here. So here you're at year 5, which tends to be a real significant pivot point based on the data that I told you about earlier. That seems to be a real pivot point for many rental property operators, especially people who self-manage. So that is, so let's just pretend that for argument's sake that you have $125,000 purchase price on the property, and you're completely mortgaged up. You're able to get into the property, 100% financing, no money down, which that might be the case if you lived in the property. It's certainly doable. So in this particular case, you are, there you are, you've got this $125,000 mortgage. It's 7% mortgage interest rate. Now, I know mortgage rates are way low right now, but let's just say this is an owner. It was owner occupied when you bought it, but it's non-owner occupied financing. So we're going a little bit high end. Doesn't change the numbers that much because it's still a 30-year amortization, but the monthly payment and a 7% mortgage over 30 years at $125,000 is $832 a month. Okay, that's just principal and interest. That is not taxes and insurance. So if you want to add an extra 100 for each of those, that would take your payments down significantly, or add, it would basically take away from your profitability substantially. But that's not my point here. My point here is that by the end of year 5, you have paid $50,000 to the bank. You've also paid $43,000 of that $50,000 to them in interest. Okay, so $50,000 in payments, you've only gained $7,000 in equity after 60 payments. So if you're thinking that the deck is stacked against you, based on the way that the banking industry makes most of their money in the first 5 to 7 to 9 years, and most people bail after the first 5 to 7 years, where are the cards stacked against you? So think about that. But wait, it gets better. Let's pretend, for argument's sake, that you're like, you know what? I'm not ready to get out of this game yet. I'm going to stick it through. I'm going to see this through. And by year 7, you are done. You are just, for whatever various reasons, you are over these properties. You are ready to be done with them. And by year 7, like most self-managing or just rental property owners, you are ready to leave this business. You are ready to exit stage left. So here you are, it's the end of year 7. So I'm going to do some math here. So if you want to get some pieces of paper out and follow me along, you can, but I promise you the math is right. So let's pretend that, let's just pretend that, the economy's been good, real estate's been on a tear, and it increases in value 5% per year, year over year, which means it's compounding the value at 5% per year. So over 7 years, the math is pretty easy on this. It's actually 1.05, right, to the 7th power. That's how you do that, for 7 years. So it's 5%. So it's 1.05 to the 7th power, whatever number that comes out to be, times the original purchase price of $125,000. Okay, so what does that come out to be? So you sell your property for 170, or you at least list it and sell it for 175,900. That's what the value is now. So cool. Like, all right, well, I paid down 7,000 off my original 125,000. So I'm down to like what, 118,000? Okay, give or take. Well, actually, after 7 years, it'd be down to 114,000. So, all right, cool. Go me. Not looking too bad. So I'm going to net $61,900. It's not been too terrible of, the last 7 years. I mean, at least I'm getting a good chunk of money out of that, right? All right, well, let's pump the brakes, because I know some of you who sold properties, you're going, wait a minute, that's not at all how you're calculating that, right? Because you have to take out closing costs out of the transaction. So what kind of closing costs am I talking about taking out of that 175,900? Well, you got to take the 6% commission for both, for the realtors, right? If you're selling it that way, plus an additional roughly $10,000 in closing costs and concessions and everything else, because nobody can seem to put money down on their own property anymore. That's become a thing. So now you're looking at roughly $20,500 out of that net that you were originally planning of $61,900. Well, now your net is about $41,400. But wait, there's more. Now you have to think, well, 41,000 over that wasn't great, wasn't too terrible, but yeah, that might be what you're getting at the closing table, but that you got to calculate taxes. And here's where you really get the kick in the wiener, because you're not paying taxes on that 41,400. You get to pay taxes on the amount of that plus the amount of depreciation that you've been able to take for those 7 years. So in this particular case, let's just use straight line depreciation. And depreciation is basically the amount of money that you've been used to offset ordinary income for the time that you've owned that property. So you've been getting the benefit of depreciation to the tune of roughly $4,100 a year, offset against ordinary income, which has been great, right? You're like, cool, it lowers my tax burden, right? Well, here's where you get to repay all that, and that's called depreciation recapture. So you get to take all the depreciation that you've been able to take across all 7 years, add all of that up, that's called accumulated depreciation, and you add that back, but basically it's called adjusted basis, blah, blah, blah. I'll let you look up depreciation recapture and you'll understand what I'm talking about. But you basically add that back to your taxable, or the amount that would be taxed, okay? So you're going to be adding back to the amount of like roughly $4,100 times 7 years, which is $29,300, okay? So $29,300 plus the $41,400 is $70,300. So now or it's at $70,700. That's it. So you're going to be paying taxes on $70,700 instead of the $41,400 that you're paying, right? That sucks, because now you're paying taxes on a larger amount, not the smaller amount. Okay. So let's pretend you're at the 28% tax bracket. So you're now going to be paying $19,800, right? If this is taxed as ordinary income. And now your tax basis, or now the amount that 41,400 is now 21,600, right? 21,600. So I'm just saying now, again, I know that I'm making some wild assumptions here, and I know that the capital gains and all that is different. I'm just saying let's just follow me here for just a second. My point here is that you were planning on this huge nut that you were going to be making from the sale of this property, and you suffered along for 7 years just saying, okay, well, hey, I'm going to make, $62,000 on this property back of the napkin. Well, no, actually not. You're actually going to walk away after you've paid taxes somewhere around $22,000, right? Amortized over 7 years, that's about $3,000 a year. I don't know about you, but I could think of an easier way to make an extra $3,000 a year rather than being at the beck and call of a tenant. So what to do? Now, obviously there's, I believe in investing in rental properties, and I'm thinking, holy crap, like I didn't make any money for those 7 years about the property. Well, chances are you probably paid too much for it, or you didn't allocate things that you should have been allocating for, which is what happens when most people don't analyze their properties, the cash flow of their properties up front properly. So, how do you avoid all this emotional compromise? How do you avoid from making all these bad decisions around year 5 and year 7? Well, that's the thing. You do that with the system. And that's, did I get to that point where I was in year 5 or year 7 where I wanted to sell these properties? I didn't, actually, because I was still looking at growing. I did not mind spending my weekends doing that. And I was like, well, geez, man, this is crazy. Why would I want to go and do all this extra work at the end of the day where I'm looking to sell the properties? Well, I never looked to sell the properties. It never really even came into my sphere until I did sell the occasional property. And I was like, man, why is my taxes so much higher? Because I was getting killed because of all the accumulated depreciation being added back to my basis, right? For that particular property. So it really sucked. It really, really sucked. And here's what I can say. You avoid all that emotional distress by having a system. A system is what gives you boundaries. A system is what has you avoid all of that stuff to begin with, so you don't get to that emotional disparity, where you're just so distraught at year 5 and year 7 and year 9 and year 10, where you're just so emotionally compromised that you're going to make those decisions. And that's what you really need to look at when you're making these decisions. Now, again, this is where my course comes in. I'm not here to tell you about the course. I'm just saying that's where, when you're looking to set up a business, that's what you need to be looking at, is to set up those systems so you're not going to wind up emotionally compromised, right? Think about, how do the credit card operators set that up? They're not emotionally compromised. They have systems in place where they have people that call, that do all that stuff, right? The people that are collections agents and all this other stuff. And they have systems in place to handle the maintenance, to handle all the emotional stuff that comes up. So that's how you do that. And I think for anybody that is going into this business that's going about it the wrong way, especially the amount of people that are getting into the rental business now, that are getting into the business right now, that are getting into it without a system in place, I'm just letting you know, you might be setting yourself up for failure, only because I have seen this happen over and over and over again. So I don't know. I hope that was helpful for you. If you want to argue with me on anything, feel free to message me, but I know my numbers are right. The only thing that might be off, and again, I'm making some obviously some judgment call here, is obviously the taxable rate could be less than the 28%, but still you're still paying taxes on a much, much higher number, and you're making it at the worst possible time, because you're literally you're getting ready to crest where the amount of interest that you're paying to the banks is going to start becoming less and less and less as in proportion to the amount of the mortgage payment that you're making. So so that's where you really have to start thinking, does it make sense to sell that property outright? Could you 1031 it? Could you offset that in another way? Lots of different things there. So anyway, that's all I have for today. Let's go ahead and close this out with one of my favorite quotes. I love Mae West. I don't know anything about her, except I think this quote is actually pretty solid. You only live once, but if you do it right, once is enough. Thank you very much, Mae West. And that's all I have for today. Let's go ahead and see. I know we're running really long today. Wow, that was a lot longer than I was expecting. But yep, nobody commenting on there. So I'm not gonna. I guess nobody stayed long enough to argue with me. Well, we'll see what happens down the road as this gets pushed out. Anyway, have an awesome rest of the day, everybody. Please be sure to place a value on your free time, because if you don't, someone else will. But most important, there is no amount of money that will make time irrelevant. Have an awesome day, and I will see you next time.